Good morning and a very warm welcome to you, wherever you're tuned in from, to this Young Enterprise event, which is all about minding your money. My name's Ollie Barrett, and let me just say, before we even get started, I could not be a bigger fan of this incredible organization. I am a lifelong Young Enterprise fan, and it is a genuine honor to be your host this morning. So welcome, thank you very much for tuning in. This is such a crucial topic for young people, this whole topic of money, because 2/3 of young people are really not confident about how to plan their financial life. And frankly, maybe that's not surprising if we're not talking to them in the right ways about money in the first place. So if you think that talking about money sounds, dare I say, a little bit boring, I know not all of you will, but some of you might, then I guarantee that my guest shortly, or our guest shortly, will change your mind on that. He is the man who's made financial literacy sort of a national priority. He is a long-term supporter of Young Enterprise and in particular Young Money, and he's shown us all how to save our cash, of course. I'm talking about the money-saving expert himself, aren't I, Martin Lewis? And we're going to meet him very, very shortly. So Martin, I know, is going to be telling us really why financial education matters more than ever. And then we have got just a brilliant panel of experts, and I've absolutely loved meeting them in the run-up to today. We've got a fantastic influencer, TikTok expert, mortgage advisor. We've got one on the board of Children in Need. We've got consumer editor of the FT. I'll tell you all about them very shortly, but they're brilliant. I sort of only wish we had a real green room so we could all be having coffee with you as well today. Speaking of which, brief bits of housekeeping, very important. We would love you to share with your communities anything that you hear that resonates today. So any great nuggets, please use our hashtag, Let's Talk Mindset. Let's Talk Mindset. Do it now. Maybe not my eyebrows, maybe make sure Sharon's on or something in a minute. But we'd love you to share this conversation far and wide. So thank you. Couple of bits of housekeeping. Hopin, this platform, tends to work a bit better on Google Chrome, I hear. So if you're having any technical issues, maybe just check the platform and switch to Chrome if you can. And otherwise, just drop us a note in the chat and our team will try our best to help you out on that. Now, if you'd like to post a comment or a question, there's a box for that. You can see a Q&A box on the right. So fire those through and I'll try my best to weave those into the conversation. It could just be a pithy observation about what you're seeing and what you're hearing. Right. If you are watching live on the Hopin tab, there's a People tab. And that's really interesting because you can see who's here today, who's in our audience, if you like. Feel free to connect with people, say hi, say good morning. If they've got a green dot, it means they're live on the platform right now. And I've been allowed a secret look at the guest list, and it is not only knockout, it's also the biggest guest list we've had for one of these events. So thank you for tuning in. Right. It is my very great pleasure now to introduce you, really, frankly, as I see it, to the driving force behind today's event. It gives me huge pleasure to welcome to our screen the Chief Exec of Young Enterprise. Actually, I hope she does, well, I know she won't mind me saying she began her career as a youth worker, and frankly, she's brought that insight with her all the way to the top. It's a genuine pleasure always to work alongside her. Please welcome to our screen, Sharon Davies. Good morning, Sharon.
Morning, Ollie. That was a big build-up. Thank you.
How are you?
I'm really good. I'm so excited. I'm so excited about this event today. Thank you so much for hosting for us.
Not at all. Sharon, you've been so busy over the last 18 months, but I just credit you for continuing to do things in person, but also virtually. You just haven't stopped.
There's so much to do, isn't there? There's just, it's such an exciting point in time. Yeah, phenomenal, really. We're really enjoying it.
It's huge. So, Sharon, tell us this morning, what are we really aiming to achieve with this Minding Your Money conversation?
Well, it's funny that you should mention youth work, actually, Ollie. I was recently at the brilliant Wigan Youth Zone interviewing 3 young people for the current podcast series, Minding Your Money, and I asked them what did they wish that someone had taught them about money? And I was really struck by their responses. So Natasha talked about wishing someone had taught her about saving. Dylan talked about wishing that someone had taught him about what money could bring you, what you could do with it, and how building a credit score could really open doors for you. And I think it's fantastic that financial education plays such a critical role in preventing financial exploitation, tackling problem debt for all of us, particularly for young people who are starting out. And wouldn't it be great if we could find more ways of talking about the potential of financial education to help us realise our dreams, help us to plan, and potentially to change our lives? So the this morning's event and this morning's conversation really, and the podcast series, is about how can we start to use financial education as that opportunity maker, that enabler in practical ways, and also to explore the often overlooked role that mindset plays in building financial capability and the benefits of understanding the impact our attitudes, our beliefs, our values have on how we behave around money.
Yeah, because I guess if we can get this right, I mean, that changes not only the young people's lives that we work with, but it's bigger than that, isn't it? So I suppose let's be ambitious about this, because I know that's at the core of the organization and you personally. Where do you think this could take us, or where do you hope this could take us as a society? Well, let's think about the potential of this conversation.
I think the potential here is huge. If we think about, there are so many conversations happening right now about levelling up, about how we increase social mobility. And by the way, one of our guests, the amazing Saeed Aksha, has got a really accessible definition of social mobility. He talks about it as the opportunity to get ahead in life, no matter what your background is. So thinking about that, I'm hoping this conversation helps us as a society to really consider the very real potential that financial education has to make a contribution to social mobility, to act as that enabler, that help to get you ahead. And ultimately, that this then leads to more young people seeing that being financially capable is a real way of practically helping them get on in life.
Yeah, 100%. So I'm really hoping that someone tuned in today, I mean, it's such an engaged audience anyway, but just might be pinged with an idea, thinking, here's what I could do a bit differently. Here's how I could serve in a different way. Here's what we as an organization could start thinking about. So we'd love to hear what's getting sparked in your mind. Thank you very much indeed, Sharon. I know you're going to be tuned in throughout, and I'll hear your reflections at the end. But thank you so much on a personal note for teeing all this up. You and your team are just doing such fantastic work. I thought it might be interesting to put a poll question to you, if you like, this morning, viewer. So you'll find those polls over on the left-hand side. So here's poll number 1. We'd like to know to what extent you agree or disagree with this question. Right, there is a link between financial capability and social mobility. So you can either strongly agree, neither agree nor disagree, strongly disagree, or you just don't know. Don't know, that'd be honest, wouldn't it? So that's the question. To what extent do you agree there is a link between financial capability and social mobility? Now we're going to have a look at the results a bit later on. So now let us move on to someone I know you're looking forward to hearing from. He's a bit of a legend, and I must say I have been hugely looking forward to this conversation. We had it a little bit earlier, and it's someone who will be very familiar to you all. There are very few people who have shone a brighter light on money and how we use it than our guest today. He has, frankly, changed the way we think about money. He hasn't been afraid to take on the big banks, particularly around their charges. He's campaigned on student loans, and he's really got us thinking completely differently about something that is so core to our lives. He is the ultimate consumer champion. He's a financial journalist. He's a broadcaster. Of course, he is best known as the money saving expert. He also co-founded a very interesting institute, the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute. Of course, you know who I'm talking about. It's a great pleasure to welcome our very, very special guest, Martin Lewis. Martin, how great to meet you.
Thank you for having me. What a lovely intro. Can I go now? I don't think I can do any better than that.
I've got a question before we even get going, because I see your output. You put so much good stuff out into the world. Where on earth do you get your energy from, Martin?
So people often say to my wife, is he like that all the time? And the answer, of course, is no. I'm rather quiet most of the time. I sit there. I learned a long time ago that, and you know, just within the cohorts of the people watching this, money is quite boring for most people. Now, please don't quote me on that or say I ever said it, but that is it. Most people don't want to talk about money. They don't want to think about money. They don't want to think about their finances. They'd like to bury their head. Even those who have money see it as a chore. And I actually find it relatively fascinating. I find it fascinating, or almost gamify what you can do with it. In the early days, I used to talk in very adversarial language. You know, a company's job is to screw us out of cash. Our job is to screw them back. I don't use quite that anymore, although I do still believe that we have an adversarial system. You know, the best analogy I give is Man City, who I support, play Manchester United. I desperately want Manchester City to score. I do not want Manchester United to score. But I don't believe Man United are wrong for trying to score. And I think in some ways the consumer and the company has that adversarial relationship that, you know, they're each trying to get the upper hand. And I always felt that consumers were subservient and sub-educated about that. And that was my role. And I found it quite exciting and it's empowering. And these days, you know, I get enormous feedback from people. It's just countless numbers and lots of thank yous, which is really lovely. So the passion is not for the money itself. The passion is for the enabler, for the life change that you can get. And the truth is as well, if I, who am the guy on telly or radio or on the website, I'm not engaged in what I'm talking about, I can't expect people who tend to find money a bit boring anyway not to be. So the energy comes from that. The energy comes from knowing that if I don't push it, nobody else is going to. But if I push it, this can manifestly, absolutely, genuinely transform people's lives.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for sharpening all of our wits on this subject. I've got so many questions for you, Martin, but I wish I had 2 hours. We've got about 15 minutes, and I've got a couple of questions that have been sent in to me as well. So
one of my other tricks, by the way, for keeping energy is only agree to do 20 minutes in interviews, so you've still got the energy all the way through it.
No, that's true. Well, let's get on, because you have spoken about the fact that as consumers, we don't get any, what I would call like buyer's training, really. So let's get practical. What suggestions have you got to help young people develop good habits with money?
Well, the funny thing is, I think the most important thing we can teach young people is to ask questions and to understand that whatever consumer decision you're making, whatever transaction you're making, there is generally always a better way with a little bit of time and a little bit of research put into it. And it's interesting that people sort of know there are certain areas, people know they can save on their credit card or in normal times, and we are not in normal times, on their energy bills. But I have a rule that pretty much everything you're spending money on, there is normally a better way to do it if you take a little bit of time to think about it. And the more time and the more knowledge you have, the better it gets. Now, the funny thing is when you talk to children about money, they engage in it. When we did the initial study, it was sort of that we had the all-party parliamentary group on financial education, which was myself and PFEG at the time, which is now Young Money, and the great work that was put in. And we were a sort of triumvirate trying to get it on the national curriculum. We got some pushback from maths teachers who said, oh, I don't want financial literacy. You know, we need to be teaching people pure maths. But what's interesting is, of course, while those who are into maths and have high ability at mathematics, they are keen on doing whatever maths you throw at them. If you take the bulk of young people who are not mathematically engaged, the study and the work that we did showed that by putting financial numeracy into the maths curriculum, it improved engagement in maths rather than caused it to be a bad thing. Now, I think the other thing you can read about that, and that was done particularly to counter the argument that maths must be pure, is that actually within the relatively anodyne world of education, financial education is quite sexy, because we're talking about practical, real things that can change your life. And you can talk about a man digging a hole for 3 days and he's got this much space. But if you talk about how much your mobile phone's going to cost, or your car insurance is going to cost, or what you're going to be able to spend, or what decisions you need to be able to make, those are things that you can engage in because they're real lives. And I had a show on, when you're watching this, it'll probably be a week or two ago, where I went into a school and saw the financial education textbook being taught. And we were there for such a long time. And the best thing that happened was there was one, I shouldn't call her a little girl, but my daughter's a little girl, she's 8, she's 9 now. This girl was 12, 13, and she came up to me at the end of the hour and a half we'd been in there. And I know we have cameras in there and it's helpful and whatever. But she came up and she said, I just want to say thank you. That's the best lesson I have ever had at school.
Yes.
And it was,
yes.
And so talk to them about reality.
Yeah.
And
this is
something that's interesting. When we sat, and it was a smoke-filled room with Liz Truss, when the government was offering to put financial education on the curriculum, and they put something that was very weak there, and they brought me in and said, look, we're doing it, and said, you're not doing it. And they said, what would it take? What will it take to get you to agree that this is financial education on the national curriculum? And there were lots of things in there. But one of the things I push very hard is contemporaneous, real examples. You know, we want children to be looking at real examples of credit card interest rates and actual products. They have to know it's tangible, it's real, it means something. It cannot be theoretical. And of course, we can teach the theory. But one of the things that we must engage in is parents. A big call for this is for older children, clearly. There is a big call I have on parents. Talk to your kid about the family finances. Talk to your children about how they work. Engage them in it. Because when those children become independent adults for the first time, making their own financial decisions, the fact they've had some experience of the genuine practicalities or even the impracticalities of dealing with your own finance, we all know of those impracticalities, is really powerful. And more so, the ones who really hide it tend to be the ones who've got financial problems, actually. Credit kids,
absolutely.
Credit kids with some intelligence and some compassion. And if you tell the children the reason that you can't buy them the peer pressure goods that they're wanting to when they're 15 or 16, because this is the reality of the family finance and you're doing everything they can and it's important, most feedback I get tends to be that they recognize, acknowledge it, and are far better at dealing with it than they are if you just try and tell them you can't have this and set the rules. And so making it real is one of the best ways to engage in it. Kids, we all know our kids want to know about our lives. They want to know how the world works. Make it real and they engage.
Right. I honestly think, Martin, that could have been taken from the main mantra of Young Enterprise. It really is so refreshing to hear that message from you. Learning by doing, making it real, bringing the outside world into young people's lives. If you were giving a pep talk, either to a school child or maybe to the parents about some of the pitfalls to sort of sharpen their senses about the sort of things they need to be watching out for as they go out into the world, you know, with a healthy relationship with money, let's run through some of the things that would be on your hit list.
Well, unfortunately, and I've campaigned on this for a lot, we live in an online Wild West world where the internet that we have and social media especially is hideously unregulated. And it's unregulated both within posts and it's unregulated within the world of advertising. So I've been campaigning over the last couple of months to get scam adverts included in the online safety bill. But I think it is important that we look to the start point is online safety. And you could take this as a wider theme of who do you trust? Who should you trust? Learning to understand, and schools are getting quite good at teaching this, the difference between a reputable source and an irreputable source. Irreputable, unreputable, not reputable, whichever one you want, have any of them. And understanding the differences between those sources is the first point. But actually, again, back into that classroom that I was in a couple of weeks ago, the teacher said a really interesting example. I had a picture of 4 people. I had me. They had a singer who was cool, so I can't remember his name. They had Meghan Markle, and they had a comedian who was cool, so I can't remember his name, or her name, whichever way around it was. And they asked the children in this class, if you saw them in an advert, who would you trust most? And the kids, quite rightly, ranked royalty second and me first, which I think is appropriate. And then I said, okay, do you think royalty do adverts for financial products? And they looked. And one of the children went, no, they don't do adverts. And I said, so what does that mean? And she said, that means if you see an advert with royalty in, it must be something really special. And so then I explained, and I showed them my social media post, which has this fake tattoo of I don't do adverts on it, and that I don't do any adverts, although I'm in lots of them, and that you have to be, and their eyes were open to scams. And I explained the logic of the scammers, which is the scammers use the same logic, which says, who's the most trusted? Let's use them in an advert. Right. So, I mean, one of the first places I would start these days is because before they get involved in transactions, they are involved in social media and social communication, and that sets the narrative of the world that they live in. So the first thing I would do is start to teach a level of skepticism, start to teach them what is a legitimate source, where they can go, that goods that are advertised as goods don't necessarily aren't what they say they are. Where are you buying? How are you buying? How do you protect yourself? You know, what consumer protections in place? Who do you have your rights with? Consumer rights for kids, all of those stuff, because again, going back to the early answer, the practicals, they all involve so much good, meaty, practical information that it starts to build that healthy level of consumer skepticism that's so important.
And I think that is the most powerful link I've heard made between financial literacy and digital literacy. You could almost add on commercial literacy onto that, as we're looking out for these pitfalls. But very quick,
I tell you what, it's very interesting, because I know you come from the young enterprise side of young enterprise, and I'm always very clearly on the young money side. And now, while they are not in opposition, that the clarity for me goes back to that adversarial relationship, and therefore teaching people to be entrepreneurs is about teaching them how to make money within a business and a commercial context, and teaching them to be consumers is the other side of that. So I like to have some, I'd say, clear blue water, but looking at the screen we've got, we'll call it clear green water in between the two. But having said that, that isn't to say that, that there isn't a symbiosis between those skill sets. Yeah. Understanding numeracy, financial literacy, understanding how products work, all of those consumer skills will help somebody be more employable. I look the other way around. When I was 18 and I had my year off and I sold caravan awnings in Harrington's Caravans, which is now closed down, but I sold caravan awnings and I learned how to sell, and I learned all these tricks of how to sell. And when I wrote my first book about saving money, they were the opposite techniques that everything I'd learned. I said, well, this is what salespeople try and do. Here's how you need to counter those and stop them. So the fact that they're mirror skills, the enterprise skills and the consumer skills to an extent, is really important, whatever people decide to do in future.
Yeah, got it. Martin, you up for having a question that somebody sent in?
Sure.
Here it comes. It's from Dylan Marshall at Wigan Youth Zone. So if we can get that coming in, we'll hear what Dylan wants to ask you. Over to you, Dylan.
Hi Martin, how can we make conversations about money more relatable to young people?
Well, that's always tricky when you're asking a 49-year-old man, but it goes back to everything I've said. Make them real, make them practical. But that doesn't mean we have to solely focus on the things that young people will engage and experience themselves, which are shops and mobile phones, and when they get a little bit older, car insurance, and buyer's rights. I think it's worth understanding the genius of the way that some commercial firms work. I mean, one that I've always found young people, and again, I'm talking teens here, and not a younger age. It's important to teach younger about money, but focusing on the teens is actually doing the maths of credit card minimum repayments. Credit card minimum repayments are genius. Let's just take a second to think about the way that credit card minimum repayments are designed. You have interest on a credit card, it will be 18 or 20%. And so when you are a credit card company, what you really want to do is you don't want people to pay off their debts. You want them to constantly be in debt and paying you so that the interest continues to accrue and you get a long-term income stream. You don't want people to default because that's bad, nor do you want people to finish paying because that's bad. So what you want to do is elongate the debt period because you make more money from it. And credit card minimum repayments, let's think about it. Credit card minimum repayments. My minimum repayment's lower than your minimum repayment. Doesn't that sound good? It's good, isn't it? It's lower, it's less, it's good. But actually, it's not, of course. Because what you do is if you have a minimum repayment, and regulations have changed, I was involved in campaigning for it, they can't quite do this anymore. But the way that it used to work is your minimum repayment would often be around the same amount as the interest or slightly less. Then if you borrow on a credit card and you make the minimum repayments, you will be paying it off for 20 to 30 years if you have a couple of grand on there, because of the minimum repayments are structured in that way. And actually, if you were just to fix your repayments, you would repay it so much more quickly. So I actually find that people are always scared of complexity. They're scared of making it too difficult. But if you engage in the complexity, in the same way you engage in something that's scientific, or the same way you engage in the difficulty of a game that you're playing on the computer, same way you engage in the statistics of a football match, if you engage in the complexity and give an appreciation for what's happening, an appreciation for what you can do, I think you can bring young people into it.
Right. I couldn't agree more. There's this terribly patronizing tendency to think that because someone's younger, they're somehow dimmer. And actually, the reality is almost entirely the opposite.
And more so, let's remember, and one of the reasons why I would like to educate the whole nation about finance, but we start by funding in schools and pushing it on the curriculum in schools, is young people are professionals at learning. And if you want to break the cycle of bad debt or break the cycle of bad consuming, you start it when they are open to learning, they're used to learning, they're used to being taught, and you rework it over 30, 40 years as that moves through society and is coupled with ongoing education and better information, which we have now due to the internet. You know, there are lots of things you can do. I've got the textbook, the Young Money textbook behind me. People, that's the teacher's guide version. It's worth downloading. On Money Saving Expert, we have our Open University Money Academy, the Academy of Money, where adults for free can go and take courses in improving their financial literacy. The information is out there. And if you start to give people a taster for the knowledge, hopefully they'll pick up on it.
Brilliant. Well, that is a perfect opportunity to bring in another question. It comes from a teacher, a Centre of Excellence teacher, Faye Gibney. And here's what Faye wants to ask you.
As a teacher working with children as young as 4, I'm aware of the significant influences on them from a very early age. When do you think we should start teaching financial education with young children, and why?
Well, we're both fathers of daughters. This is on our minds. Martin, what's your answer?
As soon as they're old enough to pick up a coin or go in a shop. But to be honest, my personal philosophy as a parent is start educating them about everything as soon as they can, as soon as they show an interest in it. So look, one of the interesting things about money is that there's a lexicon, there's a language to money, right? That and it's changing and it moves. But when they're older, we're trying to teach them to ask questions, understand answers, and see how things work. When they're younger, part of it is just understanding the lexicon. You know, I had a long conversation with my little girl the other day, she had her 9th birthday last week, about the difference between debit and credit cards. And then we talked about which is best. And then she said, debit card must be best because it's more simple to understand and you've got them. And then I explained about overdrafts and she said, oh, I'm not sure which is best. And I said, well, as in with all things, it depends on how you use them. And we have those conversations at 9. Now, I wouldn't have had those at 5. What I did at 5 is I took her into a shop. And funnily enough, she takes after her mother and she's not that into sweeties like her father. So when she goes to a party and she's given sweets, she brings them home for me because she doesn't like sweets. But she does like a bit of chocolate and is allowed it very scarcely because my wife is very strict on such things. But we get, and I said to her, we had the conversation about why there were sweets near the till and why there were chocolates near the till. And I explained that so they could remind you to buy them before they go. And then we talked about why do they want to remind you to buy them. And then I explained that because the shop's job is to make money, and it wants to make more money, and that's what it's there to do. And therefore, you've got to remember when you're in a shop, it isn't necessarily trying to help you. It's trying to serve you, but not necessarily what it says or what it does is right for you. And those type of very small conversations are important. Perhaps the most important financial lesson to very, very young, starting school age children is opportunity cost.
Yeah.
It's the idea that if you have your money, you can only spend it once. So you can buy something and have your instant gratification on your sweets or your comic or whatever it is what you want now, or you can save and wait for the bigger thing that you're really dreaming of if you wait a good few weeks for it. I'm a great believer as well in pocket money should be pay. It shouldn't be a gift. Now you can set what the standard of pocket money is. You can set up what work they need to do, and it can be pretty trivial as long as they understand that it's something that they have a duty to do. And I'm not a great believer that tidying your room is pocket money because you're doing that for yourself. So that's something that you do as your own responsibility. But we had some small tasks around the house that we say to her, you get this and you get your pocket money.
Yeah,
and I think that is an important lesson. You work for your money. Money has a value. That value, you can only spend it once, so you've got to work out what the greatest value of it is and understand that out there are companies and there are firms and they want your money, and it's worth thinking carefully before you give them your money whether that's the right thing to do or not.
Yeah, totally. Really, really powerful. Now, there's just a couple of things before our time is up I really wanted to ask you about, because I know that the relationship between money and mental health is very close to your heart. So give me just a sense, are there particular areas around money management that particularly have an impact on young people's mental health? What would you zoom us into, Martin?
Well, everything we talk about, having a sensible relationship, if you like, with money and understanding it is important. And many people are scarred often by the parental relationship with money and seeing money as either something that they never have and they're angry about having a lack of, or that there's an attitude in the home that just spend it and it doesn't matter, and you see that people don't take care of it. I mean, educating children that how money management is important is a great place to start. It's worth remembering, if we talk about mental health, and not just some stats on that to start with, you are 3 to 4 times more likely to be in crisis debt if you have a mental health problem than everybody else. The clinical treatment time for depression is exacerbated by up to 18 months for people who have a financial problem. Makes sense, really, because there is something to worry about. And so there is a marriage made in hell of those two things. And we have an unhealthy relationship with money because of the constant consumer pressure we get, the advertisements that we see everywhere pushing you into a spend, the peer pressure that comes from a young age to have designer, to have the best, to have the latest phone. All of those start to build a relatively unhealthy message with money that comes across of you must have what you need to have regardless of the financial consequences. And I do think, I have my concerns over social media like many others. And I think, the Instagram generation of it's got to be perfect. It is a nightmare. It is an absolute nightmare. The lost list, if you like, one of the things that we must teach young people is don't ask, how do I get all that? Ask, how much have I got to spend and what's the best that I can have on it? But going back to the mental health issue, I need to be careful. I'm not an expert in young people's mental health, and money and mental health. The policy institute I set up is focused on adults, but absolutely being aware that the financial issues, there's the old money doesn't make you happy is absolutely true. Having wealth, having money doesn't give you happiness, but not having money does make people sad or depressed or anxious all the time. Not dealing with your money is a huge cause of mental health. Money is not just a financial issue. It causes family rifts, mental health breakdown. There are 400,000 people in England alone in 1 year who consider taking their own lives due to financial issues. There are 100,000 people who attempt to take their own lives due to financial issues per year. So understanding that relationship between money and mental health is crucial. Now, when you're younger, it's your family who have those pressures. But of course, we all understand, this is why I talked about communication earlier, that if you don't have the things that other people do have in school and you don't understand why and you can't manage it because your family are under pressure and they're not talking to you and they're stressed and they're anxious, that will translate to young people, exacerbated by that lockdown feeling in the pandemic, which is just a very simple catalyst for improving, for gearing, if you like, as a financial term, for gearing up anxiety and depression across the place. So I'm not an expert in the younger people stuff, but I think everything translates, and we can't take money out of the mental health discussion.
Right, fantastic. So of the many things I've taken from this, Martin, make it real. Anchor all these conversations in the real world, but crucially, have these conversations with your kids, with your students. Don't shy away from them. The ups, the downs, the reality check. And start young as well. I mean, these messages for me have landed really loud and clear. The final two super brief questions, and I'll ask you to be pithy just because I'm going to introduce our fantastic panel momentarily. Should you be caught in a lift, not that you might want to be, with the new Secretary of State for Education, or indeed the Prime Minister himself, and you wanted to give them a rocket about how to send this up the agenda across Britain's schools, what do you say?
The PPI mis-selling bill came to just over £40 billion. If we were to put 0.01% of that money into financial education, and we were to educate children across schools in the country far better, then national economic nightmares like PPI mis-selling wouldn't happen again. The triviality of the cost of financial education in proportion to the gain both for the economy, the individual, and for the NHS of having people being more financially savvy, more financially literate, and better able to take care of themselves. It would be the best return on capital employed the government has ever had.
Yeah, well, we will make sure that message lands loud and clear with said individuals. Thank you, Madam. I guess my final question, as I say, a huge thank you from this community, is your final message. We have business leaders with us today, teachers, of course, in their other lives, parents as well. What's your rallying call to them, particularly about how the wider community champions, supports the financial education of young people? What message would you like to sort of leave us ringing in our ears today?
Look, I think the wider community supporting education of young people is important, but if we want consistency, we need to have it taught in schools. Now, we need to have it taught in schools, and it needs to be taught in teachers like other subjects because it's a proper rigorous subject. The biggest message I would give is, while I love volunteers going in to help, and I think it adds a flavour and a texture to what is taught in schools, is that we all need to be mindful. Teachers in schools doing it properly is what counts. And let us remember, unfortunately for us, I'll leave the wider political discussion, while we got it on the national curriculum for senior schools in 2014 in England, and it's on the other national curriculums, and while it's on the national curriculum for primary schools in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and not in England, which is something that should be changed, the academisation and the change and the free school movement in the UK means most schools do not have to follow the national curriculum. So the fact that it is on the national curriculum does not mean that all children are taught it. How do we get that changed? Well, we win hearts and minds of teachers and head teachers and parents. We talk about it. We politely go and speak to head teachers, tell them how important it is and tell them how needed it is. Because ultimately what we've done is we've devolved education down to schools and away from a national centralised system, and that means we need to devolve the campaign too.
Yeah, Martin, thank you so much for giving us such a brilliant slice of your time today and speaking so widely and thoughtfully across that range of issues. If it's all right with you, just I can say on behalf of Young Enterprise, we'd love to keep in touch with you because your messages here are going to be talked about for many, many months to come. So thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, I mean, goodness me, I thought I had a bit of energy. Martin Lewis, what A legend, absolutely brilliant, and he was such good fun to talk to as well. So hopefully that came across. Lots of comments from you already. If you're just joining us, this is our Enterprising Mindsets event brought to you by Young Enterprise. I'm Ollie Barrett. So many of you on the platform at the moment. If you're tuning in live, welcome. Hop in for the win. Over almost 300 of you actually, and the chat is beginning to buzz. By the way, thanks for using the hashtag Let's Talk Mindset. I can see that starting to ping around Twitter as well. What are you saying to me? Well, I'll tell you. Lots of good questions here. As children learn through doing, I can see how handling pocket money can be a benefit, but for families where pocket money isn't an option, how can young children best get practical experience? Very good question that's come in from somebody. So thank you for that. That's been on my mind. Lorraine Ullman, what an absolute legend. Lorraine Ullman tunes in. I'd like to work on a support program for parents to run alongside the financial education that happens in school. Totally, you're in the right place, Lorraine. Stay tuned. Well, we asked you before the break our first question, our poll question about the link, whether you thought there was a link between financial capability and social mobility. Well, 51% of you agree and 43% strongly agree. So between you, sort of 94% either agree or strongly agree. That will be music to the ears of some, if not all, of my next guests. Let's meet them now, but a big thank you to Martin for that. We've got a knockout panel for you. Let's bring them up and meet them. Yes, there we are. Well, let's have a Zoom wave. I think that's absolutely right. Yes, good morning, everybody. Right, well, I can already see who's won the power background, and I'll tell you who that is, but it's Claire, and I'll tell you why. But let me introduce you to them in turn. Saeed Acher, MBE, is the former Social Mobility Commissioner, and he's also the founding CEO of Youth Leads UK. Good morning, Saeed.
Morning.
How are you? Well, thank you on behalf of the nation for playing that role as Social Mobility Commissioner. Just give us a glimpse of what Youth Leads is up to.
Thank you. Youth Leads is an organisation that supports young people develop skills for the working world. So developing those, well, often people call soft skills, but actually I call them life skills, you know, knowing how to speak to people, knowing how to write emails and things like that, and using social action as a route to developing themselves.
Awesome. And out of the north of England, but presumably with plans to scale that up.
Yeah, that's right. We work across Greater Manchester at the moment, but have done work in Yorkshire and also in the southeast.
Yeah, fantastic. Welcome, Saeed. Next up, Claire Barrett. We're kindred spirits. We're not related. And Claire, you look like you're in the opening scene of a Hollywood movie because you're at HQ, aren't you?
I am. I work for the Financial Times and I'm in our City of London building, Bracken House. It's really cool. It was built in the 50s for the newspaper. We then moved out in the 90s, but we've moved back in the last 3 years and it's all been done up. They've even managed to get rid of the mice.
Oh, I love it. It's like a scene from Suits. I love it. You are the consumer editor of the FT, you know, just this powerhouse, hugely trusted globally, but you're also the host of the FT's Money Clinic podcast. What sort of guests do you get on that?
Well, our current episode is called How to Get a Pay Rise, and we've got 3 listeners with 3 different problems, had a lot of feedback to that. And I'm also a trustee of the FT's charity, Flick, the Financial Literacy and Inclusion Campaign, and we totally support many, many, many things that Martin just said.
Awesome. Well, I want to dig into that a little bit shortly. Thank you, Claire Barrett, for joining us. Emmy Dent, lovely to see you, Emmy. You are, well, I think of you as an influencer. You're a mortgage advisor, but you're also the founder of Arise Financial. And you, I have to compliment you on this, Emmy. You've got a brilliant way of just getting a message out there across so many different platforms. I love it.
Thanks, Ollie. Some people think I'm a bit blunt, but other people seem to like it. So here we are.
And did that start because you'd had some sort of people trying to trip you up money wise? What was the spark that lit the flame?
It was more just there was no information. There was nothing available for anyone. And I was like, I know this as a mortgage advisor and no one else does. So why can't I just tell everyone? So that's how that started.
Oh, well, thank you for doing it. And I've got lots of questions for all of you. Fozia Irfan, OBE, is Director of Children and Young People at children in need. Fozia, thank you for joining us. I'm surprised you're not having a lie down. You've just had an unbelievable event. How are you?
Tired, I think, is probably the word, but really exhilarated. We had a brilliant evening last Friday, and the whole team is just really celebrating the change that we can now bring about for children and young people in this country.
Amazing. Are you allowed to tell us what the totalizer topped out at?
At the moment, it's about 40 million, just over 40 million, and we expect that to keep rising.
Amazing. No, huge kudos to you and your teams. Thank you, Fozia, for joining us. By no means least, Russell Winard is the Director of Programmes and Services at Young Enterprise. Good morning, Russell. How are you?
I'm very well, Ellie. Thank you.
For somebody, and this in like 30-second version, we've got such a great group joining us live today. Just give us a glimpse of the range, because that's what inspires me about what you do. It's the range of ages and programmes. Give us a glimpse.
Yeah, so from 3 up to 24, covering enterprise, financial education, work readiness, and working directly with young people and working with those educators, and educators in the broadest sense. They could be parents, youth workers, teachers. I hope that's 30 seconds, Ollie.
No, that is no. The first time I've ever had a 30-second answer to that question. Actually, that's awesome. Thank you, Russell. Well, welcome everybody. What I've done is I've got a few questions for you each, and then we've sort of got all play rounds, and I can see the questions are absolutely flying in. So I'm sort of getting overwhelmed by those, which is brilliant. And let's talk mindset. That hashtag is kicking off as well. Good. Saeed, let me pick on you first, if I may. And it is about your former role as Social Mobility Commissioner. Tell me a bit about this connection you see between social mobility and financial education. But before you do, just to remind us in your own words what we mean by social mobility, because it's a phrase that does get bandied about.
Well, the official definition of social mobility is that link between a person's occupation or income and the occupation or income of their parents. And where that link is strong, there's a lower level of social mobility. And where that link is weak, there's a higher level of social mobility. But for me, I have a different definition. And the reason why is because when I was appointed at the age of 22, my friend said to me, "Oh, so you're the new Social Mobility Commissioner. Is that something to do with mobility scooters and wheelchairs?" And I had to think of a way to describe to them that's not quite what I'm doing. So for me, social mobility, it's all about what allows you to get ahead in life, no matter your background, whether that be housing, education, and socioeconomic background. But I draw a pretty strong connection between social mobility and financial education, because one of the biggest routes out of poverty is education, all kinds of education, financial education, careers education, and academic education. And I think we'd be in a much better place as a country if we have invested more previously in financial education and more real life education. And access to good and credible financial education is sadly sometimes compounded by other barriers to social mobility.
Yeah, it is.
So let's think about how we teach people how they might be able to get out of poverty, how they might be able to earn more, and how they can save. And you'll have seen the news this week that the number of children in care in England could reach 100,000 in the next few years. I'm one of those. I grew up in care in Greater Manchester, and I had a fairly rocky relationship with money, as many care experienced young people do.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, thank you for speaking openly about that, as you have done before today as well. In practical terms, how can we help people manage their money more effectively? What would you like to see?
More involvement. I think, I think of that quote, tell me and I forget, teach me and I may remember, involve me and I learn. And that's what we need to do more of, involving young people. Because I remember my social worker who set up my first bank account, and it was just done. It was just done for me, and a card arrived where I was living with information on it. I wasn't part of that process, so I had no idea what goes into something as simple as opening up a bank account and using a card. I didn't know anything about it. And then I started getting offers for credit and very, very tempted to take them because I never really had a lot of money. And those offers were very, very tempting indeed. And similarly, when I was a little bit older and student loans, I've never had so much money in my life when £3,000 dropped into my bank.
Exactly, you're getting hosed down. But I think this is a way of saying, Said, being briefed about what to watch out for in advance is the key to that.
Absolutely. And all of those things help you to feel more in control of your finances. You become more financially capable, and that's got huge benefits for social mobility and mental health and well-being.
No, thank you, Said. Well, I'll have more questions for you, but why don't we take a question? It comes in from Kimberly Lamb, who's head of Bedfordshire's Violence and Exploitation Reduction Unit, and she's got a question specifically for you, Said. Let's have a look at what Kimberly says.
Hello, my name is Kimberly Lamb, and I'm a fellow Minding Your Money podcast interviewee. I currently work with young people as the head of Bedfordshire's Violence and Exploitation Reduction Unit, known as the VERU. And in the VERU, we repeatedly observe the different attitudes to money that many of our young people and families have purely because of various inequalities and the challenging environments in which some of them live. So I have a question around those challenges. What can be done on a more societal level to positively influence our young people's relationships and mindset around money? Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Kimberly. Said, if you thought you're getting small, easy questions, you were wrong. Sorry about that.
I was about to say, gosh, there's a number of things. I think that there needs to be mandatory primary school financial education by the end of this Parliament. There needs to be that commitment. It just needs to happen. I think we need to see education providers working in partnership with employers and the non-profit sector to support not just young people in schools, colleges, pupil referral units, etc. But I think young employees, I think it's hugely important that employers think about the people that join them at entry level and give them that support and have a dedicated outreach programme for them. And finally, if I must, and now I can call these things out even more that I'm no longer in that public position, but tackling the cost of living crisis for young people is incredibly important. That the household bills is an urgent priority, and the government should establish a commission to assess why the cost of living hits the young so hard.
Right. Thank you, Said. Actually, fantastic. And a comment coming in as you speak about the importance of higher education. So you talk about young employees. Let's bring in Claire Barrett on this, because Claire, listening to Said there, you must have come across so many of the issues that he describes. And I just wonder, as I hear Said speaking, how much of our relationship with money might come from our sort of early sort of childhood experiences. What do you think?
Well, I mean, there's a huge body of academic research that says our kind of mindset to money is broadly set by the age of 6 or 7 years old, which is incredibly young. Now, what interests me the most about this is how difficult it is to teach young children about money now that cash is vanishing from our houses, from our high streets, from our shops. So I look after my 2-year-old niece quite a lot at the moment. If she's very good, I will go and get her a pain au raisin, which is her absolute favourite snack, and she deconstructs it and eats it. And if I'm lucky, I might get a bit of the action. Now, she knows when I tap my card, or sometimes I even let her tap the card, she knows that's how we're transacting. That's the exchange for this treat. But she doesn't understand anything about the value. You know, you don't get a receipt with anything nowadays, so it's not like you've got numbers on a piece of paper that you could show. And as for piggy banks and money from the tooth fairy, I had a colleague the other day who had to put €1 under their child's pillow because that was the only cash that they could find in the house. And it's a real problem, because if we're going to give children financial literacy, as you were talking about with Martin, we also need digital literacy.
Yes.
How are you using contactless cards, managing them on apps? Now, you can get these services, but you've got to pay for them until your child is about 11 or 12, or 14 in some cases, until the banks will give them something. And then how does that sit with what we were talking about concerning social mobility? Because if you need to have a smartphone now to manage your money, your own smartphone or an iPad, there is a cost to that. You need to be on broadband. There is a cost to that. This whole digitization is expensive, and a lot of people are excluded from that, and that is how they are the skills that we're going to need to navigate the world we're living in now and the future world too.
Right. Well, in true world-class journalistic style, you've certainly put your finger on the problem, Claire. What is the answer? What would you like to see more of?
Well, if the banks are saving so much money by cutting branches and sending us all online, then I think they have to give something back to customers in terms of better services for people rather than expecting them to be paid for. Right. And when it comes to the whole area of how schools fit in, now obviously we're giving children much more technology in schools now in order for them to learn. Blackboards are the thing of the past, electronic whiteboards are the way to go. Kids are getting tablets, schools are able to buy those in bulk. Could some kind of connecting of the dots be made up there?
Yeah, totally. Deconstructing a panorama. I'm going to file that under current affairs. But moving on mindsets, Claire, can those be changed? You've talked about how early they're formed. Can they be changed?
I absolutely believe that they can. And I think that a lot of the time we learn through our mistakes. I'm quite willing to admit the mistakes that I've made, because I think, as somebody who is described as a money expert, it can be intimidating. People think, well, I've made lots of mistakes, I can't turn myself around. I'm living proof that you can. I didn't start a pension until I was nearly 30 years old. Right. I didn't want to start one at my last company because I thought there's no point, I'm going to leave soon. And I was there for 7 years. So, there's lots of reasons why we need to get to young people at these critical junctures of their life, university, taking on debt, understanding student loans, then starting in the workplace, these crucial pieces of information. And financial education is a lifelong journey. It's not something that should stop at 16 or 18 when you leave school. It needs to carry on.
So you can see the faces of your fellow panelists. Well, we can, the audience can't, but just nodding away. So this is really resonating. Very briefly, and then I'm going to introduce Emmy. But what tips have you got, Claire, to help young people reimagine their relationship with money? Because you've talked about the potential to shift, to change.
I would say digital banking can really be your friend. The whole key to understanding your finance is budgeting. And that can be a bit of a boring word, spending diaries. It all feels a bit hair shirt, but you can actually automate a lot of these processes. You can see what you're doing. You can compare month on month, year on year. You can work out how to build up a little bit of an excess. And that is the key to everything in life. First of all, building up emergency savings or saving up for something big like a holiday, not having to get into debt if an accident should befall you, which will really cost you a lot of money now with the interest being charged on overdrafts. And then, that savings habit, once you've got into it, then you can start thinking about investing, growing your money for the future. Pensions, retirement, all of these things will all flow from that basic skill of just being mindful with your money and what you purchase. And I have to say, at this time of year, Black Friday, when we're being besieged with discounts from the retailers, my Black Friday advice is, if you don't buy it, you get 100% off.
That's a good reminder. I can already see my daughter's eyes rolling when I point that out to her, but we'll see. That's good. Thank you, Claire. We'll have to get you back on the podcast. I think that's great. Fantastic. Let's bring in Emmy Dent. Emmy, lots of what Claire has said will resonate. Martin spoke a lot about the risks of social media, bad financial products being sold out there. He talked about an online Wild West, didn't he? So what do you think? How do young people navigate social media for the genuine advice of information to avoid the scammers?
Yeah, first of all, it's really hard. There's so much stuff online where you're looking and you're like, that looks so genuine. Like, how could it not be? My best advice, don't get us wrong, I think there's a lot of work that we all that needs to be done. But if it looks too good to be true, it usually is. And anything, so there's a site called the FCA who basically regulates anyone who can give advice. Everyone's got access to that. So if you see something online and someone's saying, go and get this investment or go and get this, search the name of the person on the FCA register, and that will tell you if they're qualified to be given that advice or not. Do a bit of research on the company that they say they work for and things like that. I think there's such a massive way that we need to be going. I think any advert that comes up, I know we've got like the little ad thing that they have to put on now, but I feel like there should be some form of warning that comes across the bottom.
You're making me think, Emmy. I don't do any of this. I think, gosh, that's seriously. This is. I mean, we're all learning something today. You recently fronted a TikTok campaign to particularly increase understanding of financial decisions, terminology. How did that go?
It was really good, actually. It was amazing to be asked by TikTok to do it. So the hashtag was #FactCheckMyFeed. So just how to spot whether things are real or not online and what we should be looking for. And the campaign itself did really well. But what I found was almost great and a little bit frightening at the same time. A lot of people were watching the video I made and didn't realise it was a campaign. They just thought it was a normal video that I just happened to have made, because we're so used to just taking everything we see as gospel, really.
So what's the lesson from that then? Because is that a good thing? It's like, gosh, that made me, some people would say, well, that's a good thing, Emmy. If the message was genuine and resonated, it didn't matter.
Oh, yeah. In that case, I think it's absolutely brilliant. But it was more just the realisation of, I could have said, transfer me this £500 and I'll invest it in this. And people would have done the same because they just trusted that what I was saying was correct.
Yeah, I get it. No, it's a responsibility. So on that, I mean, lots of people will be tuning in thinking TikTok, right? We could do that. So how do you get that balance between entertainment and real sort of quality, often quite serious content?
Yeah, it can be quite hard. I'm not going to lie. It's more just whatever message I want to get across. I think sometimes as long as the message is there, if I put it over in a funny way or a to the point way, that doesn't so much matter. Some videos do really well, some don't do as well. But as long as the message is clear that I need to kind of get out there, it'll hit the right people that need to see it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, great. So we don't have to do a strange dance or something like that.
By all means, if you want to, Ollie. Like, I feel like you'd be very good at it.
Well, I'm just warming up. I'll speak to Sharon about that later. We've got a question for you, Emmy. Stand by. It comes from Natasha Lancaster. Let's have a look at what Natasha wants us to know.
Hi, my name's Natasha from Wigan Youth Zone. My question is, do you think learning about money can help someone build a better life?
Well, that's a good question, Emmy.
Yeah. Absolutely. I really do believe that. I just think there's no kind of downsides about learning about money for me, but as from like a mortgage background, if you learn about things and understand how that's going to impact your life, even if you're not looking to buy a house for the next 10 years, you know when you get there that you've done all the right things and that you're going to be in the best position. So I don't think it's a downside of learning about money.
Okay, right. Well, we're going to put that broader question to our panel later. Thank you for now, Emmy Dent. Let's reconnect with Fozia. Fozia, thank you again for joining us. I want to understand how the pandemic has impacted young people and their relationship with money, if that's all right.
I mean, the pandemic has really, really disproportionately affected young people. I mean, young children in all situations have really felt the brunt of the pandemic in terms of families, family finances, family income may be reduced, all the stresses and anxieties that go along with that. But if you think about some particular age groups, those from 14 to 18, those ages are when you're really thinking about planning ahead for the future. You know, all those milestones in terms of work experience, trying to think about what you want to do in terms of university, jobs, etc. All of that has been completely disrupted. So simple things like building your CV are really, really complicated now, really difficult to do. And then the older age group, 18 to 24-year-olds, that's the age group which I think has been most impacted in terms of recruitment and in terms of employment. A lot of the employment which is available for them now is unstable, it's intermittent, and it just doesn't provide that financial stability that they need. And, you know, for the long term, this is going to have an impact in terms of being able to even save. You know, so young people, I think, have been the most impacted by the pandemic.
No, absolutely. And if you're just tuning in, this is Fozia Irfan from Children in Need. Fozia, Claire talked from a different angle about you know, things going digital. You know, we don't necessarily have the coins to demonstrate a calculation in the same way. But a different question for you: how do we increase young people's access to financial education, particularly if they don't have those digital resources? I mean, it's a challenge, but also a big opportunity, maybe.
Absolutely. And I think what's really been demonstrated through the pandemic is the importance of having digital access. You know, and the inequality of access really reflects the inequalities that we see, you know, economically within society generally. So the first thing is to increase access to digital devices. And a lot of work has been done in this area. But I think what's not being understood as much is, yes, you may be able to give a child a laptop, but you also need to have connectivity. You need to normally have a parent alongside who can help, who can support, who's got the time. And if both parents are working, etc., you know, there just may not be that capacity and ability to support digital access. So it's not just a question of giving somebody a device. And I think that's one part of the equation. The other part of the equation is also thinking about how else do people learn, you know, not just digitally. A lot of people have access. For those who don't or aren't engaged, how do we get the financial literacy and education through those other means? And I agree with everybody else in terms of the national curriculum being a really key point to try and get this financial literacy point across.
So on that, Fozia, what about the sort of wider role of families and communities in delivering financial education? I mean, you know, children in need, but actually all children exist within a wider context, right?
Exactly. And actually your first teaching experiences are normally within the home. And I always think you're learning through formal structures, through education, through the school system, but there are all of these informal structures around you as well. Your community, the place where you go for your youth club, all your friends, your peers, those are also systems of learning. And, you know, we're doing a piece of work within Children in Need at the moment where we're using youth workers to actually talk about financial education through the Money Heroes project. So it's about not just thinking about the formal structures, but the informal structures. And I think one of the key things is people learn from family, friends and peers. And as adults, we also need to have that financial education. And there is still a lot of hesitancy and adults feeling that they don't know enough to teach children. So that also needs to be tackled.
Yeah, and I can see some questions and comments coming in saying exactly that. Thank you, Fozia. Why don't we turn to Russell Winard from Young Enterprise itself. Russell, why don't we just talk about this connection between financial capability and an enterprising mindset? I mean, do you see a relationship between those two?
Certainly I do, but I think to answer that more fully, we just need to explore a little bit about what we mean when we say enterprising, because I think there are connotations around business, and I think being enterprising doesn't necessarily have to have that relationship. It's about an approach, a state of mind, it's a mindset, and it's about making the most of those opportunities which are presented to you. It's potentially how you navigate your way positively around challenges that might crop up. And I think if we're clear about what that enterprising mindset is, then it's much easier to then see what that relationship with being financially capable is all about. Because life is all about managing unknowns. We'll be presented with unknowns, and we need to find a way to work with them. And a lot of those unknowns will have money relationships. We'll need to make choices. We'll need to make decisions. Martin alluded to that, and I think if we can have that enterprising mindset combined with a financial capability, then we can achieve far more positive outcomes.
Yeah, 100%. So, and I must say, one of the reasons I started Tenor was because I thought too many interventions were like a swimming teacher showing a PowerPoint. I just said, let's take them swimming. I think some of what Martin said about making it real will have resonated with you.
Absolutely. It's as much as we can, because here's the thing, inside schools, it can be really quite difficult to work with money for real, and even youth groups, etc. So I think there's a really strong relationship that we have to have with parents and carers, where there's more of that experiential learning that can happen, and in school maybe slightly more theoretical. But if we can get the two working together, like our Money Heroes program that we have, those two coming together, really impactful, because you've got key influence from home, but with that consistent learning in school.
Yeah, love it. But by the way, we're talking some of the big picture, aren't we? But what about an individual example? You must see these where this combination has really made an impact on someone.
Yeah, so I was a teacher a long time ago, Ollie, and I taught financial studies for my sins. And one of the things that used to come up quite regularly, and it always surprised me, was the number of young people who would say, I'm not going to university, sir, it's too much debt and I'll never be able to repay it. And we would have hours worth of discussion around how student loans actually worked, and the fact that they were only repaid at 9% above a certain level of earnings. And once we'd had those conversations, very, very different perspective, and we'd built that financial capability, but in doing so we'd opened a mindset that was then, okay, this is achievable and accessible to me, and I didn't think that it was. And I think there are plenty of those kind of examples where being financially capable provides further opportunity.
Yeah, and kudos to you, but also to anyone who takes the time to have those conversations, because those conversations all unlocks understanding. Thank you, Russell. Right, time for another poll question to you, our guest. We're asking you, it's an agree or disagree one. Do you agree or disagree that more could be done to promote the positive impacts of financial capability in financial education, for example, social mobility, not only on how it helps to prevent harm and risks? So do you agree or not with that statement? Fingers crossed on that. I'll let you know how we get on. Right, now, questions from the audience. And I think that this is one that we might sort of bring everyone back in for, really. Now then, stand by, panelists. So we heard Martin Lewis, welcome back everyone. We heard Martin Lewis talking about getting financial education on the curriculum, and that's on many of our guests' minds, but we seem to have lots of questions coming in about what can be done to support financial education being taught in school as part of the curriculum, and how do we make it engaging? Right, who would like to have a crack at that and be as pithy or as provocative as you? Yeah, Claire, you see, straight away, I knew I could rely on you. Come on.
Well, I've been into some schools with the FT's Flick charity, and it's totally true what Martin says. Children are incredibly engaged with money, and I'm sure most of the people watching, are interested too. And one of the things that they most wanted to talk to us about was crypto. Now, my colleague Lucy Calloway, who was an FT columnist for many decades and has now left and is a maths teacher, maths and economics, she wrote a piece for us which is free to read. I'll tweet it out in a second, called Crypto in the Classroom, last week, because she is aware that there are 14 and 15-year-olds who she's teaching who, through fair means or foul, have managed to, get an account and buy crypto, dabble in these very high risk, get rich quick kind of investments, which really underlines the need of, why we need to be teaching our children about these things, about the dangers, but also about, the rewards that can come from investing for the long term. So what we would very much like to do is to educate the educators. Teachers are not given proper training in how to teach these financial topics. it's not really properly on the curriculum in any meaningful way. We believe it should be part of not just maths GCSE, but also English language, because so much of this is comprehension, understanding the small print, and that a more holistic approach really should be taken to this, not just by schools, but by parents as well, because they often need to learn.
No, thank you, Claire. So who else? Yes, Russell and then Emmy.
And just to Claire's point about crypto, we did a session to primary and secondary school teachers a couple of weeks ago, and it was a high priority area. So you're absolutely bang on there. They're seeing young people trading in crypto, which is quite scary. But in terms of what more we can do, the Money and Pensions Service, that's the arm's length government body that has responsibility for financial well-being, they recently, within the last couple of weeks, produced schools guidance within England for primary and secondary schools. And I think that's a really great step. And we need to bring that guidance to life. We need to make it real for those educators, and we need to align as much as we can to other priorities that there are within school, because financial education on its own, as much as goes against the migraine, it's not going to be the highest of priorities. So we need to align it to things that are high priorities in school.
That's very wise. Totally.
And agree with the teacher training as well. That's
Emmy, thank you, Russell. Emmy, what's your take on this? Are you there?
Sorry,
Emmy?
I was on mute. One of us had to do it. It was going to be me. I totally agree with both what Claire and Russell were saying, especially with the crypto. I feel like everyone, why that's got so big is because especially young people can see, if I put this in this, I'm going to make this much money. And that why wouldn't anyone want to do that? But it's the education behind it, and we need to start doing it with more, exactly like Claire said, like long-term investments.
So Emmy, let me ask you a question then. Do you understand cryptocurrencies?
But not because of what my job is, just because I generally find them interesting and want to look into them. But could I give advice on it? Absolutely not.
So how do we decide who? Most people I talked about crypto haven't got a clue what they're talking about, if I'm honest. So how do we decide, Claire, what are we going to do? Send in the FT? Is that the answer?
I think that when it comes to understanding crypto, the truth is nobody understands crypto. People can think that they can understand it, but what young people are so attracted to is the fact that many people have made a lot of money quickly. And in a world where you need, tens of thousands of pounds to get your foot on the property ladder, the young people I'm speaking to see investments like that as the only way that they can get on in the world. And that really is the problem. It's understanding the risks. If you want to take a risk and do this, that's fine, but only do it with money you can afford to lose, because these kinds of investments are akin to gambling.
Right, thank you, Claire. Questions coming in, and Fozia, perhaps one I could put to you initially. How do you think we can make the financial education equitable so students from all backgrounds are able to access and engage with it? And this is really close to Young Enterprises' heart, this one. Fozia, thought starters.
I mean, that's a really big question. I mean, the bigger question is, how do we make society more equitable? Because then naturally, things will be distributed more equally anyway. I think in terms of equity, all of the things that we've talked about in digital access, if you look at the difference in education in terms of what private schools are teaching, the exposure that those students get to a wide variety of different experiences, etc., and compare that to schools which are working in very socioeconomically deprived background, there's absolutely no doubt that there is inequality of access, and that needs to be tackled. My own personal opinion is that we use the places where particularly those from socio-economically deprived backgrounds will go. So the youth centres, the community centres, so it's not about waiting and for those people to come to us and then we're going to start a programme of financial education. It's about let's go to those places. So we're reaching them rather than waiting for them to access our education.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Saeed, what's your take on that, by the way?
I completely agree with everything that Fuzzy has said, but also it's one of those things where I spent a lot of time speaking to teachers, particularly senior school leaders, and one thing that came up more often than not in some of the deprived schools that I visited was those that come in from the private sector to teach young people about money often aren't very relatable themselves or use relatable language or examples, and that then turns young people off. So I think it's incredibly important that organisations that conduct that kind of outreach are mindful of the kinds of activities and examples that they use in order for it to be more equitable.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Now, there's clearly a problem worth solving here, because we asked you whether you agree that more could be done to promote the positive impacts of financial capability. And between you, 93% either agree or strongly agree. So who will give me, if we bring everybody back onto the screen, that'd be a disappointing morning, wouldn't it, if 90% said it was all right? Who's got a really bold idea? Let's get some audacity flowing around the panel this morning. What would we like to see? Obviously, we're all on the record, aren't we? But who will give me a bold idea to get us thinking over our panneau raisin later this morning? Come on, Russell. Yeah, come on. I knew you'd be there, Russell. Come on.
I'll kick it off with a bold idea. So something that I think we've been needing for a very long time is more longitudinal impact studies on the impact of financial education. Yeah, we have a lot of anecdotal feedback. We have some limited longitudinal study, but actually we really need to begin understanding what the impact of delivering financial education to 4, 5, 6-year-olds, what does that have in later life, and how is it attributable?
Yeah, I love it, Russell. It's so big. I'm just going to leave it there for a second, but I like it. Who will give me an enormous policy-related idea? You're in a lift with the Prime Minister, maybe in Peppa Pig world, maybe not. But I could pick on you, Saeed, because it will be one you've thought about. But these are important levers. Politics is not boring.
Completely agree. I think that one of the things I would ask for is the extension of existing schemes like Help to Save beyond those who are just on benefits, for example, to people who are under the age of 30, who aren't claiming benefits but are on low incomes. And I would ask for a new savings scheme specifically to help under 30s with emergency savings.
Now we're getting there. Good. I like it. Fozia, would you throw one into the mix?
Well, actually, I agree with Saeed, because I also work in relation to financial inclusion and looking at the reasons why people turn to high cost credit. And the statistics about that are shocking in terms of the majority of people who turn to high cost credit, if they just had savings of £500, that would be the buffer between them turning to high cost credit and going down that whole exploitative path. So savings for me are key, especially for people from economically deprived backgrounds.
No, thank you, Fozia. Claire, I've got a question for you. So many amazing organisations on this call today. What can corporations do more of to help improve financial literacy? That comes from Vicky Gardner, head of EMEA Data Analytics at SCORE. Thank you, Vicky, for that.
Well, a couple of different ways to answer that. I mean, firstly, I think that the workplace is a hugely important centre for financial education, because it's the place where we're earning our money, and it's also the place where we're putting most of our money for the future in terms of the company pension scheme. And I'm doing a lot of outreach at the FT this week, because this is the time of year where you can change your choices. And believe me, even people at the Financial Times need a bit of help and reassurance with knowing that what they're doing is the right thing to be doing. It all comes back to asking questions and having a forum in which you can put those. Now, in terms of what corporations in general should be doing in the financial services world, I think they need to be much more clued up about the choices that consumers face. They're becoming they're becoming a lot better in terms of the transparency, the volumes of information they're giving us. But when it comes to things like bank fraud, that is an absolutely weeping sore in the economy. Hundreds of billions of pounds being lost there. We absolutely need to close the loop with the social media platforms who've been left out of the online safety bill, another issue that Martin Lewis is very passionate about, and just recognise that finance is digital. And we need a system of education, but also of consumer protection that is bang up to date.
Yes, no, thank you, Claire. And we could talk for much longer about this. I've got a final poll question for you, and then just a final question, which maybe we could sort of explore using the hashtag more widely. That final question is about the highest priority. You'll see it now in to improve financial capability among young people. It could be more research. It could be increasing early interventions. It could be more support to help young people validate credible sources of financial education advice, Emmy, or make financial education as real as possible for young people. So we'll share those results a bit later. A final question, and I'm going to ask for your 20-second answers to this as we wrap up. Our final question comes from Saifuldin, who is also from Wigan Youth Zone. Saifuldin, let's have a quick look at your question.
Hello, my name is Saifuldin, I'm from Wigan Youth Zone, and my question to you is, do you think having lots of money would change you, and why?
What a big question to finish on. Right, I'm actually going to go for your 10-second provocative thought here. No pressure, Saeed Acher.
Gosh, would it change people? I think sometimes if you think about cash, you don't want to overlook the significant steps that a large number of young people take to overcome barriers in their lives when the odds are stacked against them. So I think that I place more emphasis on that than cash.
Well, thank you. Very diplomatic. So the question, do you think having lots of money will change you, and why, Emmy Dent?
I think it can, but I also think it might not change your mindset. So I know a lot of people who make a lot of money but still have a mindset as if they don't, and can't spend it and are very funny with it. So I think it can help you, but it can't change your mindset.
All right, very briefly, Russell.
So I would say that hopefully it wouldn't change me, but I think what it would do is provide a lot more opportunity.
Ah, that's a brilliant thought. Love it. Fozia, if I may.
Oops, I think hopefully it wouldn't change you, but what I think money does do is give you contentment and peace of mind and financial stability, which impacts the rest of your life, your mental health and all your relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. Really powerful point. Thank you. Finally, Claire.
It all depends how you define lots. I'm very lucky. I'm in a well-paid job, but for the last 7 years, every pay rise I've had, I've put into the pension because I've learned how to live on that amount of money, and I don't want what some experts term lifestyle creep to get me spending the extra money I'm earning. So I would be the same, but just have a bigger investment portfolio.
Fantastic. Well, and personally, I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm very happy to find out if anyone would like to help. So very happy. On that note, can I say a huge thank you as I wave goodbye to our brilliant panel. Thank you for being absolutely brilliant without exception. Thank you. And I know someone who hopefully will agree with that is Sharon Davies, who I welcome back to our screen. But thank you, one and all. Sharon, what an absolutely great cast of characters. My brain is buzzing.
What a corker. Well, an absolute corker of a conversation. Just incredible, incredible.
So tell me, Sharon, what points really hit home? Because we've just had such an engaged audience. I mean, this has been our biggest crowd so far, actually. It's been great.
I mean, I'm just as well, the engagement of the audience has been amazing. So just some kind of insights from me. Firstly, a massive thank you to the wonderful Martin Lewis. He said it so eloquently early on, didn't he? He said he gets his energy, knowing his work, helps people better understand money because it can manifestly, genuinely transform people's lives. And for the record, we also feel that financial education is really quite sexy too. And Ollie, we want to see that dance on TikTok sooner rather than later. Thank you also to the brilliant panel. Ollie, you're a phenomenal host. Thank you. And can I just say, I think today's conversation really brings to life the very real potential that financial education has got to be that enabler, to be that opportunity maker. And if we're looking for practical ways to level up, then we need to provide more opportunities to build those skills and that mindset. The input from the audience today was incredible. How do we embed financial education into young people's learning? Lots of recognition on the workload and pressures of teachers, recognitions that we can't and shouldn't leave it all to schools. Great points made by the audience that your immediate network may not always have that knowledge and experience to help you learn. So therefore, Fozia's points about informal structures of learning, youth workers, communities, Saeed talked about the importance of relatable role models, that all is part of that ecosystem. Claire's points about enabling children and young people to develop financial capability in a cashless society will require a real connecting of dots if we're not going to compound the barriers that young people were already facing about social mobility before the pandemic. Emmy's points on validating the accuracy of financial information is going to be key. I loved the fact check my feed. Stand by for Young Enterprise's own launch TikTok campaign in forthcoming weeks. Finally, 93% of our audience said that we should do no more on financial education. 94% said that there is a link between financial capability and social mobility. So there's an appetite here. And so I think we've got a real opportunity to invest in the impact, that contribution that financial capability can make to social mobility. And I just think that's hugely exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Sharon Davies, Chief Executive of Young Enterprise. Love working with you, Sharon. By the way, by far the #1 priority of our audience today, 63% of them, and you, said make it as real as possible. And I think that will be music to the ears of the Young Enterprise team. By the way, on a personal note, this is a really important conversation. So let's keep it going. If you've taken something from today, please share using the hashtag Let's Talk Mindset. I think Young Enterprise is one of the standout organizations of any time, frankly, but it's at its best when it's in creative, audacious partnership with others. So if you think you could be one of those others, pick up the phone, get on the email, hell, send us a TikTok. I think there's such an amazing opportunity over this next year to do more together. So thank you to you for tuning in. Thank you to all of our guests, and kudos to Young Enterprise for the amazing work we're doing. Wouldn't have been the same without Martin Lewis. I think I might set a renewable energy company up based on the back of him, actually. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let's keep talking mindset. And until next time, goodbye.